Rome. March 15th, 44 BC. Before dawn, a man lies awake in the dark. His name is Julius Caesar. He is 55 years old. He is the most powerful man in the known world. Dictator of Rome, commander of its legions. The man who crossed the Rubicon, conquered Gaul, defeated Pompey, and made himself permanent. He cannot sleep. His wife is beside him, Calpurnia, and she has been crying in her sleep, moaning, reaching for something that isn't there. She will tell him in the morning that she dreamed of his murder, that she saw him bleeding in her arms. He will not listen. He has not listened to any of them. Not the soothsayer who stopped him in the street 3 weeks ago. Not the augur who examined the sacrificial animals and found no heart. Not the friend who handed him a letter containing the names of every man planning to kill him, that he tucked under his arm and never read. Not his wife. Not his closest advisors. Not the 23 separate warnings delivered to him in the days leading up to this morning. Julius Caesar, the man who predicted every military maneuver, who outthought every general, who built the most sophisticated political operation the ancient world had ever seen, walked into the most documented, most widely known, most completely avoidable assassination in human history. And this is not a story about betrayal. It is a story about something far more dangerous than betrayal. It is a story about what happens when a man becomes so certain of his own invincibility that he loses the ability to read the room he built. Part 1. The Man Who Remade Rome. To understand what happened on the Ides of March, you need to understand what Julius Caesar had actually become, not as a historical figure but as a political reality inside Rome in 44 BC. Caesar was not simply a successful general, he was a systemic disruption. Rome in the 1st century BC was a republic now theoretically governed by the Senate, by elected consuls, by a set of institutions designed specifically to prevent any single man from accumulating permanent, unchecked power. The Romans had a word for what they feared most: Rex, king. They had expelled their last king 500 years earlier. The memory of kingship, of one man holding absolute power over Roman citizens, was the foundational trauma of the Republic, the thing that all Roman political culture was designed to prevent. And then came Caesar. Caesar had not simply won military victories, he had won them in a way that made him personally indispensable, distributing the spoils of war directly to his soldiers, building personal loyalty that transferred to him rather than to Rome, funding public works that made ordinary Romans love him in a way they had never loved an institution. He had crossed the Rubicon in 49 BC, leading his army into Rome itself, in direct violation of the most sacred law of the Republic, and the Republic had bent rather than broken. He had defeated Pompey, his co-consul, his former ally, his father-in-law, in a civil war that reshaped the entire Mediterranean world. And by 44 BC, he had done the thing the Roman constitution was specifically designed to make impossible. He had made himself permanent. Dictator perpetuo. Dictator in perpetuity. Not a temporary emergency appointment. The traditional Roman dictatorship lasted a maximum of 6 months. A permanent position. Forever. Beyond term limits, beyond the consulship, beyond the Senate. He had his face on coins, something no living Roman had ever done. His birth month was renamed in his honor, July. A statue of him was placed in the temple of Quirinus, among the gods. He was not a king. He was careful never to use that word, but he had made himself something the Roman world had no other word for. And in doing so, he had created something else. A group of men who believed with total sincerity that Rome itself was in danger. Part 2. The Conspirators. History calls them assassins. They called themselves liberatores, the liberators. There were 23 of them, possibly more, the ancient sources vary, and understanding who they were matters enormously for understanding what Caesar failed to see, because they were not his enemies. Most of them were his allies, his appointees, men whose careers he had advanced, whose lives he had saved, whose positions they held because of his personal favour. Marcus Junius Brutus, the man whose name history remembers most, was the son of a woman Caesar had loved. Some ancient sources suggest Caesar may have been his father. Caesar had pardoned him after the Civil War, appointed him to senior positions, trusted him with governance of Macedonia. He was as close to Caesar as any man in Rome. Gaius Cassius Longinus, Brutus's brother-in-law, the operational architect of the conspiracy, had also been pardoned by Caesar after fighting against him, had also been appointed to senior positions, had also received Caesar's personal favour. Decimus Junius Brutus, not to be confused with Marcus Brutus, was perhaps Caesar's closest friend among the conspirators. He had commanded Caesar's fleet. He was named in Caesar's will as a secondary heir. He dined with Caesar the night before the assassination. These were not men who hated Caesar from a distance. They were men who had been inside his circle, who had benefited from his power, who knew him personally, and who had decided, for reasons that mixed genuine republican principle with personal ambition in proportions historians still debate, that he had to die. The conspiracy had been forming for months. Meetings in private homes, whispered conversations in corridors. 23 men keeping a secret in a city where secrets rarely kept. And Caesar knew none of it. Or rather, he knew some of it, and chose not to act. Part 3. The 23 Warnings. This is the part of the story that becomes almost incomprehensible in retrospect. Caesar was not walking blindly into a trap set by invisible enemies in the dark. He was walking into a trap that had been loudly, repeatedly, specifically signposted for weeks. Let's go through them. The soothsayer. Several weeks before the Ides of March, a soothsayer named Spurinna stopped Caesar in a crowd and delivered a warning so specific it entered history. Beware the Ides of March. Not a vague prophecy. A date. A specific day. Caesar reportedly laughed. When the Ides arrived and he had not yet been killed, he saw Spurinna in the crowd and made a joke of it, telling the soothsayer that the Ides had come. Spurinna's response, recorded by multiple ancient sources: "They have come, but they have not yet gone." The augur's warning. On the morning of March 15th, before Caesar left for the Senate, the official augurs, priests whose function was to read divine signs through the examination of sacrificial animals, performed the standard ritual. The animal had no heart. In Roman religious culture, this was not a minor bad omen. This was a catastrophic sign. The complete absence of the organ considered the seat of life and courage. An animal without a heart meant the gods were communicating something urgent and terrible. The augurs told Caesar directly. He proceeded anyway. Calpurnia's dream. His wife Calpurnia, a woman described by ancient sources as rational, not given to superstition, had dreamed vividly and specifically of Caesar's death. She woke in genuine distress. She begged him not to go. Caesar was persuaded. He sent a message to the Senate that he was unwell and would not attend. Then Decimus Brutus arrived. Decimus, his closest friend among the conspirators, the man dining with him the previous evening, the man named in his will, told Caesar the dream was nothing, that the Senate would mock him for staying home because of a woman's nightmare. That important business awaited. Caesar changed his mind. He went. The letter. On his way to the Senate, a man named Artemidorus pushed through the crowd and pressed a document into Caesar's hand. The document contained the names of the conspirators. It was specific. It was accurate. It was a complete list. Caesar took it, tucked it under his arm. He was still holding it, unread, when the first blade fell. Part 4. The final morning, March 15th, 44 BC. The Theatre of Pompey. Late morning. The Senate is meeting not in the Senate House, which is under renovation, but in a hall attached to the Theatre of Pompey. In the hall there is a large statue of Pompey himself, Caesar's defeated rival, looking down over the chamber. Caesar arrives late. His litter is carried through streets lined with people. Rome is busy. It is a market day. The city has no sense of what is about to happen, which is itself remarkable given how many people know. At the entrance to the hall, he passes Spurinna again. He stops, makes his joke. The EDs have come. Spurinna's answer is the last warning. Inside, the conspirators have positioned themselves carefully. Some stand near Caesar's chair. Some stand at the exits. Decimus Brutus, the trusted friend, is positioned to ensure Caesar cannot leave if he senses danger and tries to withdraw. The plan is for Tilia Simba to approach Caesar first, ostensibly to petition for the return of his exiled brother. The petition is a pretense. The approach is the signal. Caesar sits, Tullius Cimber approaches, and here, in the final seconds before it begins, there is one last moment where everything could have stopped. A senator named Popilius Laenas approaches one of the conspirators, Cassius, and whispers something to him before moving towards Caesar. Cassius freezes. He believes they have been discovered. He reaches for his own blade, prepared to kill himself rather than be taken. But Laenas reaches Caesar and speaks to him quietly, then moves away. He was asking about an unrelated personal matter. The conspirators do not know this. They only see Laenas speaking to Caesar. They only see Caesar's expression, which does not change, and they take that unchanged expression as confirmation. Caesar does not know. Tullius Cimber grabs Caesar's toga. The signal has been given. Part 5. The Ides of March. What follows takes less than 2 minutes. Casca, positioned directly behind Caesar, strikes first. The blow is glancing. It cuts Caesar's neck but does not incapacitate him. Caesar grabs Casca's arm. He is not a small man. He is a soldier, a general, a man who has spent decades in the field. He says in Latin, "Casca, you villain, what are you doing?" Then the others move. 23 men in a confined space, each with a blade. In their rush, in the chaos of bodies and panic and years of suppressed fear finally released, they are striking at each other as much as at Caesar. Several conspirators are wounded by each other in the confusion. Caesar fights. He covers his face with his toga. He tries to fall with dignity. Ancient sources record that even in his final moments he was concerned with how he appeared. He falls at the base of Pompey's statue. 23 stab wounds. Only one, the ancient physician Antistius later determined, was immediately fatal. A wound to the chest, the second blow delivered. The rest were, in the clinical language of forensic history, survivable in isolation. The conspirators had not killed Caesar efficiently. They had killed him collectively, symbolically, each man marking himself with the act, the same mechanism Saddam would use 2,000 years later with his firing squads. 23 blades, 23 men bound by the same irreversible act. Caesar is dead. The liberators run. Part 6. The catastrophic miscalculation. Here is where the story pivots from assassination to tragedy, and not Caesar's tragedy. The conspirators had a plan for killing Caesar. They had no plan for what came after. Brutus believed, and with genuine, almost touching sincerity, that the death of Caesar would restore the Republic automatically. That Romans, freed from the dictator, would exhale with relief, return to the institutions of self-governance, and resume the business of the Republic. He believed that Caesar was the problem. He did not understand that Caesar was a symptom. The Republic that Brutus was trying to restore had been functionally broken for a century, hollowed out by class conflict, by the power of military commanders, by the structural inability of republican institutions to manage an empire that now stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia. Caesar had not destroyed the Republic. He had simply been the first man honest enough to acknowledge that it was already gone. Within hours of the assassination, the conspirators discovered this. The crowd did not cheer. The slaves did not rise. The Senate did not convene in joyful relief. The city went silent. Then it closed its doors. Then it panicked. Mark Antony, Caesar's co-consul, his most loyal lieutenant, was still alive. The conspirators had debated killing him. Brutus had refused. Too much blood, he said. That decision was fatal. Within days, Antony stood before the Roman people and delivered the funeral oration for Caesar, the speech Shakespeare immortalized, the speech that turned the crowd from passive to murderous within minutes. He showed them Caesar's wounds. He read Caesar's will, which left money to every Roman citizen. He named the men who had done it. The conspirators fled Rome. Within 3 years, Brutus and Cassius were both dead, defeated at the Battle of Philippi by Antony and Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir. Within 17 years, Octavian, renamed Augustus, had become the first Roman emperor. The republic the conspirators died to restore never returned. Not for a day, not for an hour. The assassination of Caesar did not save the Roman Republic. It buried it. Part 7. The question that remains here is what historians have debated for 2,000 years and never fully resolved. Did Caesar know? Not the specific details, not the names, not the date. But did he know, in the way that extraordinarily intelligent men sometimes know things they cannot prove, that there were people around him who wanted him dead? The evidence suggests yes. He had dismissed his Spanish bodyguard months before the assassination, reportedly saying that a life spent in fear of death was not worth living. He had made remarks recorded by multiple sources suggesting he expected to die violently. He had signed his will. He had, perhaps most tellingly, stopped taking precautions. Which raises the question that gives this story its real weight. Was Caesar's death a failure of intelligence? Or was it a choice? A man who had conquered the world, who had made himself permanent, who had run out of enemies to defeat and mountains to climb. Did he walk into the Senate on March 15th because he couldn't see the danger? Or because on some level he could not articulate even to himself he had decided that a life spent checking every shadow, trusting no one, reading every letter before it could be used against him, was not the life he wanted to live? He was 55 years old. He had epilepsy. He was planning another military campaign, against Parthia, that would take him away from Rome for years. He had made himself a god, and gods, by definition, cannot be killed. Perhaps that was the real miscalculation, not the ignored warnings, not the unread letter, not the dismissed bodyguard, but the moment, somewhere in the years of victory and unchallenged power, when Julius Caesar stopped being able to distinguish between what he believed and what was true. Conclusion: the lesson of the IDs. Here is what March 15th, 44 BC reveals, not about Caesar specifically, but about the nature of power and the men who hold it longest. Every system of power creates, over time, a specific blindness in the person at its center. Not stupidity, not arrogance exactly. Something more subtle and more dangerous, the gradual replacement of reality with the model of reality that power provides. Caesar the general had survived by reading situations with cold, precise accuracy, by seeing what was actually there, not what he hoped was there. Caesar the dictator had surrounded himself, over years of unchallenged authority, with men whose primary function was to confirm what he already believed. The soothsayer was a superstition. The augur was being overcautious. Calpurnia's dream was a woman's fear. The letter could wait. Every warning was processed through a filter that had been built by a decade of invincibility. And the filter said, "Nothing can touch me," so nothing could. Until everything did. He was holding the letter when the first blade fell. 23 stab wounds. 2 minutes. The most powerful man in the world. He had read every battlefield, every political maneuver, every enemy's weakness. He had not read the letter. It was still in his hand, unfolded, unread, containing every name, every detail, everything he needed. 2 minutes too late.